The air was thick with tension over Earth's major cities when the skies were first darkened by the arrival of the Valgaroth fleet. Massive warships blotting out the sun like shadows from another world. They hovered ominously above the planet's surface, their engines emitting a low hum that rattled windows and sent waves of panic through the population. Humanity had longed for contact with extraterrestrial life, but nothing could have prepared them for the sight that now loomed overhead. The Valgaroth spoke in a deep, resonant voice, one that reverberated through the airwaves and across every communication device on the planet. Their message was simple and chilling. "We come to bring order to this chaos. We will harvest your resources and bring an end to your disorganized world." It was a declaration of conquest, no hint of diplomacy or negotiation, just a cold command to submit. Humanity was no longer the apex species on Earth. World governments scrambled into action as the first blasts rained down from the alien ships. Entire cities were engulfed in fire as the Valgaroth unleashed their terrifying technology. Their weapons were unlike anything humanity had ever seen, weapons that could level entire buildings with a single shot. Soldiers on the ground barely had time to respond before the invaders' robotic forces swarmed through the streets. Humans were nothing more than ants beneath the boots of their alien conquerors. In the midst of the chaos, one man refused to bow. Captain Alex Red Halloway stood tall among the growing fear of his comrades, a seasoned Marine with eyes that had seen both the worst and best of humanity. He knew this was a fight unlike anything before, but he wasn't one to back down. Red's squad had fought through countless battles in distant corners of the world, but this was different. The fate of the planet rested on their shoulders. Red gathered his troops in an old military bunker, their faces grim but determined. He had always believed that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its technology or its firepower, it was the will to survive, and the ingenuity that came from being pushed into a corner. The Valgaroth were powerful, but they were arrogant, and Red knew that arrogance could be their downfall. "We're not just going to roll over for them," Red said, his voice low but unwavering. "We fight for every inch of this planet, and we show them what it means to underestimate humanity." With that, the Marines set out to begin their resistance, a small but fierce group tasked with one mission above all else: to strike back against the invaders however they could. Their first target was a Valgaroth supply line, an area where their advanced weapons and reinforcements were being transported. The humans knew they couldn't win this war with sheer firepower, but if they could disrupt the alien supply chain, they could give humanity a fighting chance. Red's squad infiltrated the enemy lines under the cover of darkness, using guerrilla tactics to sabotage and delay the Valgaroth forces. Each victory, however small, was a reminder to the invaders that humanity was not as easy to crush as they had assumed. They were fighting for survival, but also for something deeper, for their right to live on their own terms, to protect the home they loved from those who saw it as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. The battle had just begun, but Red and his Marines had already shown the Valgaroth that they had underestimated the resolve of humanity. The Valgaroth had expected Earth's resistance to be a fleeting spark, a brief struggle before their overwhelming might snuffed it out entirely, but they were wrong. The small raids from Red's squad were only the beginning. As human forces rallied together from all corners of the planet, the Valgaroth found themselves facing something they hadn't accounted for: an unyielding spirit that refused to bow to their superior technology. Every time the aliens thought they had crushed the last hope of humanity, another group of soldiers would rise from the ashes. It was a war fought not just with guns and bombs, but with heart and grit. Human ingenuity and determination were their weapons. The Valgaroth had underestimated them, and now they were beginning to feel the consequences. Cities once thought to be lost causes were slowly coming back to life as pockets of resistance began to form. Guerrilla fighters and military units merged to create organized bands of fighters skilled in tactics that the Valgaroth had never encountered in the battlefield. They used the landscape to their advantage, blending into the environment like shadows, striking when least expected and disappearing before the aliens could retaliate. Red's squad was at the forefront of this new wave of resistance. Their raids grew bolder with each success. The small group of Marines had become legends in the fight against the invaders. Word of their victory spread, and soon others joined their ranks, eager to take part in the struggle for Earth's survival. They didn't have the luxury of fancy weaponry or advanced technology, but what they did have was the will to fight for their homes, their families, and their way of life. With each strike, Red and his team took more ground from the Valgaroth, causing chaos in their ranks. They sabotaged supply depots, ambushed convoys, and destroyed critical infrastructure. The Valgaroth began to realize that this wasn't a war they could win through sheer force alone. Humanity's ability to adapt and fight back was something they couldn't predict or prepare for. But it wasn't just the military that began to resist. People from all walks of life took up arms against the invaders. Farmers, factory workers, teachers, scientists, and even children in some places organized themselves into local militias. When the Valgaroth began to target civilian populations in an attempt to break human morale, they quickly found that humanity had a powerful ally in their shared sense of justice and community. People fought not only for survival but for the safety of those around them. The Valgaroth had a simple strategy: overwhelm the planet's defenses, destroy its infrastructure, and force humanity into submission. But what they hadn't counted on was the unity of a species that had faced countless challenges before and always found a way to overcome them. This time was no different. Meanwhile, on the front lines, Red continued to lead his squad through the heart of the battlefields, taking risks that would have shattered the resolve of lesser men. They pushed deeper into Valgaroth territory, uncovering key weaknesses in their enemies' tactics and technology. They learned to fight not just with force, but with strategy and intelligence, turning the tables on their invaders. The battle for Earth was no longer a one-sided affair. The Valgaroth had underestimated humanity's resilience, and now they were forced to confront the full weight of a species united in its defense of the planet. Every victory, however small, was a reminder to the invaders that this war was far from over, and that humanity's fight for survival had only just begun. The Valgaroth had underestimated humanity's capacity for resistance, but now the aliens were beginning to feel the sting of their error. The ground beneath their feet, once secure in the belief that Earth would fall without a fight, was shifting. The small bands of human resistance, led by soldiers like Red and his Marines, were creating a ripple effect that turned into a wave of defiance across the globe. The first weeks of the invasion had been dominated by alien attacks that crippled major cities and sent waves of terror through the population. But humanity's response, initially fractured and desperate, began to organize into something more formidable. Even the most technologically advanced alien force in the galaxy couldn't anticipate the ferocity of a species that refused to accept extinction. Red's squad continued to lead the charge in striking the Valgaroth where they were weakest, at their supply lines. Using scavenged weapons, makeshift explosives, and guerrilla tactics learned from centuries of warfare, the Marines executed precision attacks against alien transports, destroying weapons caches and valuable infrastructure. These hit-and-run tactics kept the invaders constantly on the defensive, slowing their momentum and forcing them to redirect resources to protect vulnerable convoys. Word of their success spread like wildfire through human forces. What had started as a single strike team soon became part of a larger network of underground groups working together to disrupt the alien occupation. The sheer diversity of tactics humanity employed threw the Valgaroth into disarray. Cities once thought lost to alien rule, such as Berlin and Seoul, were reclaimed not by superior firepower, but by cunning and sheer persistence. One of the most remarkable developments was the rise of civilian militias. In the wake of alien attacks, ordinary people took up arms, joining local resistance groups to defend their homes. These were not highly trained soldiers, but farmers, doctors, and shopkeepers who suddenly found themselves thrust into the role of warriors. They adapted quickly, learning to fight for their survival. Red had seen this firsthand in his own squad, where every person had their own unique skills that helped the group push forward. Skills they never imagined they'd need, but that proved invaluable. Even more surprising was how the Valgaroth's technology, so far ahead of anything humanity had ever seen, began to show cracks. The alien forces, having relied heavily on automated systems and overwhelming firepower, had not anticipated the human ability to improvise under pressure. Red Squad had hacked into alien communication lines, used enemy vehicles as decoys, and set traps that forced the Valgaroth to waste resources and manpower. As the weeks wore on, the Valgaroth found themselves facing a problem they hadn't expected. They could not break the will of the humans. The alien forces were accustomed to subjugating weaker species, often with swift and brutal efficiency. But Earth was different. Its people were diverse, creative, and united by a shared instinct to survive. Even when cities fell and entire regions were devastated, there was no surrender, no capitulation. Every lost battle became a rallying cry for the next. Red's leadership began to gain recognition beyond his small squad. His name, once known only to a few, became synonymous with hope and resistance. But it wasn't just his military expertise that won people over. It was his unshakable belief that no matter how much the Valgaroth tried to break them, humanity's will could not be crushed. And it was that belief that began to spread, growing into a global movement that united the fractured human race against the common enemy. For the Valgaroth, the tide was turning. The humans, underestimated and disregarded, had begun to fight back with everything they had. And with every day that passed, the invaders were realizing that the true strength of humanity lay not in their weapons, but in their relentless refusal to surrender. The battle for New York City had reached a fever pitch, and the Valgaroth were now realizing the true scope of their mistake. Once seen as the crown jewel of their conquest, the city had become a symbol of human resilience. The Valgaroth, expecting the Big Apple to fall within hours, now found themselves locked in a deadly stalemate. For every alien force that advanced into the city, there were Marines and civilians waiting, willing to give their lives to hold ground. The fight was not just for New York. It was for the heart and soul of humanity. Captain Alex "Red" Holloway stood atop a crumbling building, surveying the battlefield below. The skyline was barely recognizable. Where towering skyscrapers once stood, there were now smoldering ruins. Alien war machines stalked the streets below, their metallic bodies gleaming under the fires that raged through the city. Yet, amidst the devastation, Red saw something else, something the Valgaroth had missed in their overconfidence. The survivors had dug in, refusing to leave. Guerrilla forces, snipers, and makeshift militia were scattered throughout the wreckage, launching precision strikes on alien patrols and ambushing supply convoys. Red's squad had become legends among the human resistance. Every success, no matter how small, inspired more people to join the fight. They were no longer just fighting to survive. They were fighting to reclaim what had been lost. With each passing day, more soldiers rallied to the cause. What was once a hopeless defense against overwhelming odds had turned into an organized resistance that the Valgaroth could no longer ignore. The Valgaroth, frustrated by their inability to crush the humans, began to escalate their tactics. They launched waves of drones and robotic enforcers into the streets, aiming to flush out the remaining pockets of resistance. But Red and his team had prepared for this. They knew the city better than the aliens ever could, and they used it to their advantage. In the dead of night, they set traps that turned the Valgaroth's machines against them. Explosives were rigged in alleyways, and abandoned cars were turned into makeshift bombs, detonated at the perfect moment to cause maximum chaos. The Valgaroth, who had once assumed victory was inevitable, were now losing ground inch by inch. Every time they thought they had cornered the last of humanity's fighters, new pockets of resistance popped up in the most unexpected places. Human ingenuity, combined with the relentless desire to protect their homes, had become the greatest weapon against the invaders. Red's Marines were at the forefront of this battle. The squad, battered and bloodied from days of non-stop combat, showed no signs of slowing down. They were a tight-knit group, bound not just by their mission, but by the bonds they had forged in the chaos of war. Each of them had a personal stake in the fight. a reason to keep going when others would have quit. Red's leadership had become a symbol of hope, his ability to make the impossible seem possible driving his squad forward. One night, as the team prepared for another raid on a Valgaroth stronghold, Red gathered his squad for a quick briefing. Their target was a Valgaroth command center nestled in the heart of the city. If they could take it out, it would cripple the alien command structure in New York. The plan was risky, but it was their best chance to turn the tide. "We take this one step at a time," Red said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "No heroics, no rushing in. We hit them fast, hit them hard, and get out before they can retaliate." His squad nodded in agreement, their faces set with determination. They knew the odds were stacked against them, but there was no turning back now. This wasn't just about winning. It was about sending a message to the Valgaroth. Humanity would not be cowed. No matter how many times the aliens tried to crush them, they would always rise again. As they made their way to the command center, Red couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The battle for New York was far from over, but humanity was no longer the helpless victim it had once been. The Valgaroth had underestimated them, and now they would feel the consequences of that mistake. In the heart of the city, where the last of humanity stood firm, the Valgaroth were about to learn that they had awoken something far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined: the true strength of the human spirit. The mission to strike the Valgaroth command center in New York was a gamble, but one Red and his squad had no choice but to take. With their supplies running low and the enemy pushing harder each day, every success, no matter how risky, was crucial. Red knew that this raid could be the turning point. If they managed to cripple the Valgaroth's control over the city, it would give the rest of the resistance a significant advantage. The squad made their way through the ruined streets under the cover of darkness, moving quickly but silently through the desolate remains of the once bustling metropolis. Every shadow seemed to hide danger, every corner a potential ambush. The Valgaroth were everywhere, but so were the humans. In the darkness, Red could hear the distant sounds of gunfire and explosions, the constant hum of the alien war machines patrolling the streets. But they pressed on, moving with purpose, driven by the knowledge that their very existence depended on this operation's success. As they neared the Valgaroth stronghold, Red's communications officer, Sergeant Emily Echo Walker, crouched beside a broken window to scan the area with her portable scanner. Her face was set in concentration, her sharp eyes picking out every movement in the chaos around them. "They've got heavy defenses," she whispered. "I count at least 3 sentry towers and a dozen drones on patrol. If we're going to make this work, we need to hit them all at once. Distraction, sabotage, and a quick exit." Red nodded, his face grim. "We'll hit them fast. Set the charges, take out the drones, and breach the command center. We can't afford to waste time." The squad spread out, each member knowing their role in the plan. Sergeant Jason Blaze Harris, the team's demolitions expert, moved swiftly to plant explosives along the perimeter, while Echo and Private Marcus Viper King set up the distractions. It was a delicate balance of timing and precision. One wrong move, and they would be overwhelmed by the Valgaroth's superior numbers and technology. The tension in the air was palpable, every second stretching as the squad waited for their moment. Red's heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from the weight of the responsibility he carried. He knew that if this failed, the consequences would be catastrophic, not just for New York, but for humanity's entire resistance. This was their best shot. Finally, the signal came. Blaze stepped back from the explosives, giving a sharp nod to Red. It was time. The team launched into action. Echo triggered a series of flashbangs that disoriented the nearest sentry towers, while Blaze activated the explosives. The ensuing blast rocked the city, sending shockwaves through the Valgaroth forces and drawing their attention to the explosion. In that moment of chaos, the squad moved like shadows, slipping through gaps in the alien defenses. Viper led the way, his sniper rifle taking out 2 drones in rapid succession as they swept toward the command center. Red and the rest of the team advanced on the main entrance, quickly neutralizing the remaining guards with precise shots and quick, efficient hand-to-hand combat. The Valgaroth weren't expecting humans to be so adaptable, and their defenses, though formidable, were struggling to keep up with the speed and cunning of the resistance. Within minutes, the team breached the command center. The Valgaroth inside were caught off guard, disoriented by the sudden assault. Red and his squad moved through the facility with deadly efficiency, planting explosives on key systems and disabling communications. They were leaving no room for the Valgaroth to regroup or retaliate. But just as they were about to complete their mission, an unexpected obstacle emerged. The Valgaroth had a failsafe, a last-ditch defense system designed to wipe out anyone. Blaze wasted no time, quickly rigging the final explosives to trigger on a timer. The squad made their way back toward the exit, moving faster than they ever had before. The countdown clock was ticking, the pulse of the energy system growing stronger with each passing second. As the last of the squad reached the building's perimeter, Blaze hit the detonator, and the entire facility erupted in a massive explosion. The blast tore through the Valgaroth command center, sending shockwaves through the city. Red could feel the impact even as he and his squad raced to safety. Behind them, the Valgaroth's grip on the city was broken. They had struck a powerful blow, one that would be felt across the invaders' entire operation in New York. As Red and his squad made their escape into the shadows of the ruined city, he couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. The Valgaroth had underestimated humanity before, but now, in the heart of Earth's most iconic city, the invaders knew that the resistance was real, and humanity was not going down without a fight. Inside the facility, a countdown began, signaling the activation of a massive energy pulse that could level the entire area. "Get out now," Red shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Blaze set the final charge. Now, the explosion at the Valgaroth command center was a victory, but it came at a cost. As Red and his squad made their way through the smoke-filled streets, they could hear the sirens of alien war machines moving in from all directions. The blast had taken out a critical portion of the Valgaroth's infrastructure, but it had also triggered a chain reaction that would lead to a fierce retaliation. New York was no longer just a battlefield. It was a battleground for the soul of humanity. Red's team had completed their mission, but they had no time to savor the success. The squad moved quickly through the wreckage, sticking to the shadows, navigating the labyrinth of destroyed buildings and collapsed roads. The city was in ruins, but its people, though scattered and battered, were not beaten. Across the city, pockets of resistance fighters were already mobilizing, ready to take advantage of the chaos they had created. But the Valgaroth were not going to sit idle. The aliens, now aware of the vulnerability they had exposed, were regrouping for a counterattack. "We need to link up with the others," Red said, his voice firm but filled with urgency. "There's no time to waste. The Valgaroth won't let this go unpunished." Sergeant Blaze, always quick to analyze the situation, nodded in agreement. "We'll get to the secondary rally point. It's deep enough in the city to stay off their radar for a while. If we're lucky, we might be able to sabotage a few more supply lines on the way." Echo, ever the strategist, added, "We've made a mess of their operations. If we can stay one step ahead, we can force them into a more defensive position. They're strong, but they're not invincible." As the squad moved through the city, Red felt a growing sense of urgency. He knew that the Valgaroth would not give up New York easily, and they would certainly retaliate with everything they had. The humans had become a thorn in their side, and now the invaders would want to crush any remaining pockets of resistance before they spread any further. The city, once alive with bustling crowds and towering buildings, now resembled a war zone. Buildings lay in ruins, streets were littered with debris, and the air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. The Valgaroth had already begun their counteroffensive, deploying more troops to the streets and launching coordinated attacks to root out the human insurgents. But Red and his team knew the truth. The Valgaroth were losing their grip on Earth. As they reached the rally point, they were met by a dozen other fighters, some military, some civilians, who had joined the resistance since the initial days of the invasion. These fighters weren't part of a well-organized military unit, but rather they were a hodgepodge of individuals from different walks of life. Farmers, factory workers, and scientists, all willing to take up arms to defend their homes. They weren't soldiers, but in many ways, they were more dangerous because of it. The fight had become personal for them. "We've got word that the Valgaroth are consolidating their forces for a final push," one of the resistance leaders said, a woman named Captain Mara Owens. "They're planning something big, and we need to stop them before they can regroup." Red looked around at his squad. Their faces were grim, but there was no fear in their eyes. Humanity had already proven that they would fight to the last, and the time for escape had passed. The resistance had become a force to be reckoned with, and they were about to make their final stand. "We hit them where it hurts," Red said, his voice low but filled with confidence. "They may have the tech, they may have the firepower, but we have something they don't. Our people. We hit them hard, we hit them fast, and we don't stop until Earth is ours again." The squad nodded in agreement, and for the first time in days, Red allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. They had come this far, and the Valgaroth had still underestimated them. But now they had the upper hand. The Valgaroth thought they were dealing with an unorganized species, one that could be wiped out with a few well-placed strikes. They were wrong. As Red and his team prepared for the next phase of the assault, they could hear the distant rumble of alien war machines approaching. The final battle for New York was about to begin, and Red knew that this would be the moment that determined the fate of Earth. No matter what it took, they would fight until the last breath, until the Valgaroth learned that humanity was a force they should never have underestimated. The atmosphere in the heart of New York City was thick with tension. The Valgaroth were closing in, their movements calculated and methodical as they sought to crush the resistance once and for all. But Red and his squad had a plan, and they weren't about to let the invaders win. The rally point had become their staging ground, but now it was time to move out and strike at the very heart of the Valgaroth's operations. If they could disrupt the enemy's command structure and hit their critical assets, they might just turn the tide of the war. Captain Mara Owens briefed the group. "We have intel that the Valgaroth are assembling their forces in Central Park, preparing for a full-scale attack. If we hit them there, we can shatter their coordination and scatter their troops." Red's squad was already prepping their gear, checking weapons, and making sure their explosives were set for maximum impact. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If they failed, New York, and perhaps the rest of the world, would fall. There was no second chance. The resistance had to be swift and precise, hitting hard and fast before the Valgaroth could fully establish their strength. "We move in waves," Red said, his voice calm despite the chaos in the air. "Blaze, you're with me. We'll set the first wave, draw their attention. Viper, Echo, I need you to cover the flanks. Mara, you're in charge of the rest of the group. We take them down piece by piece. No mercy." The group moved out under the cover of darkness, their boots crunching against the broken pavement as they made their way toward Central Park. The streets were eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the sounds of combat that had filled the air just hours before. The silence was unnerving, but Red trusted his squad. They had fought side by side long enough to know each other's strengths and weaknesses. They could do this. As they neared the park, the first signs of the Valgaroth's presence began to appear. Massive war machines patrolling the perimeter, their sensors scanning the area with unyielding precision. But the squad had anticipated this. They had learned the enemy's tactics, their patterns. They knew how to stay out of sight, moving from one shadow to the next as they closed in on their target. Echo, ever the strategist, spoke into her comms. "We've got a clear path to the Central Command Unit. Blaze, Red, take out the sentries. We'll take care of the rest." With deadly precision, Blaze and Red moved forward, eliminating the sentries with quiet but lethal efficiency. The Valgaroth were still unaware of the human presence, but that wouldn't last much longer. The squad was moving closer to the heart of the enemy's gathering force, and soon the element of surprise would be theirs. As they reached the heart of Central Park, the tension rose. The Valgaroth had begun to regroup in larger formations, preparing for their final push. They were bringing in reinforcements, loading up their weapons, and aligning their war machines for a full-scale assault. But they had no idea what was coming. Blaze set the first set of charges on a nearby supply cache, a critical point in the Valgaroth's plan. It was a simple task, but it required the utmost care. One wrong move, and they would give away their position. But Blaze was a professional. With a steady hand, he triggered the explosives and signaled to Red. It was time to hit them hard. The first blast rocked the park, sending shockwaves through the alien formation. The Valgaroth's forces reeled from the sudden attack, disoriented and scrambling to regroup. Red's squad didn't hesitate. They charged, a relentless wave of fury and precision, tearing through the chaos and striking at the heart of the enemy. Viper's sniper rifle sang its deadly tune, picking off high-value targets from a distance. Echo was quick to relay targets, coordinating the squad's movements and ensuring that no one was left exposed. Mara led the rest of the resistance fighters into the fray, their makeshift weapons cutting through alien ranks with shocking efficiency. The Valgaroth were beginning to falter, their command structure falling apart as the squad systematically disabled their leadership. But just as Red thought they might be on the verge of a breakthrough, the ground trembled beneath them. A massive Valgaroth warship descended from the sky, its imposing presence casting a dark shadow over the battlefield. It was a final trump card, a weapon designed to break the human will once and for all. The ship's weapons powered up, its deadly cannons aimed at the heart of the resistance. But Red wasn't about to let that happen. He could feel the weight of his team's sacrifices, the countless lives that had already been lost. This was it. This was the moment that would determine the outcome of the war. Without hesitation, Red made the call. Blaze, set the final charges. We take down that ship, or we die trying. The mission had just gone from dangerous to suicidal, but Red had no doubt in his mind they would do whatever it took to stop the Valgaroth. If they were going to go down, they would go down fighting. And the Valgaroth would know, in that final moment, that humanity had given everything for Earth's survival. The massive warship loomed over Central Park like a shadow of impending doom. Its sleek, alien design radiated power, its engines humming with an ominous energy. Red could feel the ground tremble beneath his feet as it hovered above them, its cannons charging. The sky above them crackled with the charge of its weaponry. It was the Valgaroth's final move, a desperate attempt to break the human resistance once and for all. But Red was not going to let that happen. Blaze, Red shouted over the comms, his voice low but urgent. We need those charges set. Now. Blaze was already at work, moving with practiced efficiency, his fingers flying over the detonators. The charges they had set earlier were small and targeted, enough to disrupt the Valgaroth's ground forces. But this was different. This was the endgame, the final piece of the puzzle. If they could take out that warship, they would cripple the Valgaroth's entire offensive. Blaze's voice crackled through the comms. I've got the last set ready. Just give me the signal. Red glanced at his squad, their faces determined and ready for whatever came next. Echo was already moving to position, her sharpshooter's eyes scanning for any signs of incoming threats. Viper was crouched low, keeping an eye on the remaining Valgaroth ground forces. Mara's team was spread out, ready to provide support. The time was now. They had one chance, and it had to work. Move out, Red ordered, his voice firm. Everyone, we're making a run for the ship. Blaze, get to cover. The rest of you, let's keep them distracted. They surged forward, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the ruined city around them. The Valgaroth, momentarily stunned by the chaos they had caused, had regained some semblance of order. Their drones were starting to circle, their weapons locking on to any movement. It wouldn't be long before they'd zero in on Red's team. Blaze was already running toward the best vantage point he could find, a half-destroyed building to the northeast that overlooked the warship. "I'm in position," Blaze reported, ready to fire. Red nodded, acknowledging the words as he kept moving. "Everyone, keep the pressure on. Don't let them get a lock on Blaze. We need him to get that shot off." The squad split into different directions, some heading toward the park's edge to draw fire, others staying behind to provide cover. Red felt the adrenaline surge through his veins as they entered the open space beneath the warship. The Valgaroth weren't holding back now. Massive energy beams shot from the warship, sending plumes of fire and debris into the air. The blast radius was terrifying, but the squad pressed on, weaving through the wreckage and staying as low as possible. Blaze's voice came through the comms again. "Almost there. Just a few more seconds." Red's heart pounded in his chest. This was their last chance. The pressure was unbearable, but there was no turning back now. The rest of the Valgaroth forces, realizing they were under attack, began to regroup and counterattack with renewed intensity. Their war machines surged forward, their plasma guns blasting anything that moved. But the humans were prepared, hitting them hard with guerrilla tactics. Every shot they fired, every move they made, was a calculated risk. They couldn't afford to falter. Then a voice cut through the noise. Blaze's voice, steady and calm despite the chaos. "Target locked. Firing in 3, 2, 1. The ground shook as Blaze unleashed the charge. The explosion was deafening. A blinding flash of light engulfed the area, followed by the sound of metal tearing and shattering as the warship's hull exploded in a massive fireball. The shockwave sent Red sprawling to the ground, the air knocked out of his lungs. His ears rang from the blast, but he pushed through, struggling to get back on his feet. Around him, the Valgaroth forces were thrown into disarray. The warship, the symbol of their dominance, was now a twisted heap of smoldering wreckage. Red could feel the momentum shift. The invaders had just lost their most powerful asset, and in the aftermath of that explosion, the tide was turning in humanity's favor. "Red, we did it." Mara's voice came through his earpiece, filled with a mix of disbelief and joy. "We've broken their command structure. They're falling apart." Red forced himself up, his body aching from the blast, but a grin spread across his face. "No time to celebrate yet. Stay sharp. We still have a fight ahead of us." But as he looked around, he saw it. Humanity was holding its ground. The Valgaroth were faltering. The resistance had struck at the heart of the invaders, and the warship's destruction had sent a message that could not be ignored. They were no longer underestimating humanity. They were fighting for their survival, just as the Valgaroth had always underestimated them. As Red watched the alien forces scatter, he knew the battle wasn't over. But this moment, this victory, would be remembered for years to come. And the Valgaroth would never forget the day they learned that humans were not just survivors. They were warriors.